This episode of Brains on Games is about social emotional learning and empathy. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we are going to talk about a game about feelings. This is something that I tend to talk more about in my day job, maybe than I do when I'm talking about board games, but this is a board game that was sent to me by the folks at Tiny Sprouts, a game called Empower Empathy. This is a game for kids age 5 and up. You can play with between 2 and 6 players, and a game takes between half an hour to an hour to play. Let's talk a little bit about Empower Empathy. Like I said, this is a game about feelings, which is something that I talk much more about in my day job than I do here at Brains on Games. But learning some emotional vocabulary and thinking about feelings is something that is very important for kids, and often it's not something that just comes up in everyday conversations in families. So Empower Empathy is a game that does encourage those kinds of conversations. It gives kids some vocabulary to think about or describe their feelings, and it's something that you might use in a classroom, or you might use it as an exercise with your younger kids to sort of help them think through some scenarios. One of the things you'll see as we go through the rules of the game is that a lot of what you'll be doing in this game is talking through some social stories, which is something that teachers sometimes use, but certainly therapists often use social stories when they're working with kids on developing social skills or resilience or emotional regulation. Empower Empathy is a pretty simple roll and move game, and it's cooperative, so everybody is going to be working together on this game. You've got this great big round board, and it is a 2-layered board, so there are little holes where these pieces are going to go, and your players are going to be superheroes who are going to go around the circle here on the board. You probably can't see the whole thing on the camera. We'll focus on probably just the top half of the board, but the idea is they're going to go all the way around this circle, and they're going to try and prevent the villain, whose name is Gooby. Here, I'll show Gooby up here so you can see him. They're going to try and prevent Gooby from flipping over parts of the city to red, which shows that everyone's all riled up in those areas. That's what the villain is trying to do, is to get everyone upset and riled up. The heroes are trying to get things back under control. The tiger hero is my favorite one. They're trying to get things back under control so people can go back to being nice and kind and calm and empathetic with one another. What you do in this game is, once you've got the board set up like this, and these pieces are sorted out randomly, that really you just want to make sure that you don't have too many of these power-up squares. You shouldn't have 2 of these beside one another, so you do want to spread these around the board. You'll start by spinning a spinner, and if the spinner lands on the heroes, then you're going to get to move a hero. So the hero is just going to move around the board by rolling a die. So it is a roll and move game, like I said. So you roll a die and you move your hero along. Now, if the hero just lands on a regular gray road, you can just, they say in the rule book, just enjoy the cityscape, and you can move on to the next turn. If the hero lands on one of these squares with the red hand on it, that's a power-up card that you get to grab. And what you do with these power-up cards is you talk about whatever the scenario is that comes up. So this one says, bored. When you feel like you can't focus on a task, instead of tuning out, what's a good way to get yourself back into it? I'm paraphrasing here, but the idea here is that a parent would be the parent reading that card, and everybody will kind of talk about their ideas. The inside of the box, I'm going to put this on the small camera here. The inside of the box has some guiding questions that parents can ask. So if you're not a therapist who has these kinds of discussions every day with kids, they give you lots of ideas about what you can talk about when you're working through some of these scenarios and talking about the power-up cards. Eventually, you're going to have heroes who've kind of moved around the board. I should say, because it is a cooperative game, when your spinner lands on the heroes and you're going to move the heroes around, the player who spun it can choose whatever hero they want to move. So it's really going to depend on what square they want to make sure that the hero lands on. So eventually the heroes are going to be spread out a bit across the board, but at some point your spinner is going to land on the villain Gooby, 50% of the time you're likely to land on Gooby. And Gooby is that weird little villain who starts in the center of the board. When you land on Gooby, if he's in the center, you roll the dice. Whatever number will come up is the manhole cover, the sewer that he's going to come out of. So there are manhole covers that are numbered 1 to 6. So if I had rolled a 2, he would pop up here. And that would be the extent of what would happen. But now I have an opportunity for the heroes to run into him. If Gooby is already on the board, you're going to roll the dice, and that's how far he's going to move. And he's going to start to flip these roads over to red to show that he's getting everyone riled up and upset. Once all of the heroes have made it all the way around the board, then you're going to count up how many of these power-up cards you've been able to collect. And for each one, you can flip back one of these red roads back over to gray again. And if you're able to keep everything from turning red, if you don't have any red tiles on the board, then the heroes have won the game. But if you didn't manage to collect enough of these things before getting all the way around, then you've lost and Gooby has won. There is one other way that you can flip those red squares back to gray, and that is if a hero lands on one, you're going to draw a City Watch card. All of these are social stories that you're going to read and talk about. So you get some little scenario with a picture at the top. In this case, Oliver is sliding down a hill on a sled for the first time. Now, you're going to think about what are the feelings that would go along with riding on a sled down a hill for the first time. And you want to pick at least 3 of those. So the kids will talk around the table under the parents' guidance, and you're probably not going to pick a feeling like tired or bored, probably not confused even, but you might get excited or scared. Let's see if I can find some good ones here. Or maybe not disgusted or absent-minded, but there's the scared one. So right away, that's the first one that jumps out at me if you're riding down a hill for the very first time. But what's great about, I think, these cards, these scenarios, is, first of all, like I said, it's a social story, and that's something that therapists use in their work with kids to kind of help them think through some scenarios and reflect on emotions. I would use a social story with the child who is having a hard time dealing with their own emotions, so you can think about something that's similar to what they're going through, but it's not about them, and it depersonalizes it. So it can sometimes be easier for kids to talk about the feelings of someone else rather than their own feelings or their own scenarios. And you're still getting wheels turning and getting the ball rolling by having those discussions. You've got those guiding questions from inside the box, and that certainly makes it a lot easier. You don't have to think too hard or go very far before you can figure out what kinds of things you're going to be discussing in this scenario. So once you've got a few feelings and you've figured out how that child might react in that situation, then you get to flip that street back from red to gray, and you're preventing Gooby from making everybody angry and upset. And there are a ton of different scenarios. Riding down a hill on a sled for the first time is probably a pretty exciting thing, but what if you accidentally knock a vase off the table and break it? Definitely these are scenarios that are going to get some wheels turning for kids. Kyle lost his favorite hat at the park. There's another thing that you might feel some sadness about, for example, and how often do you talk with kids about those kinds of emotions? So how would you feel if that happened to you? What would you do in that situation? What would there's all kinds of ways that you can discuss these things with the kids, and you've got the emotional language, right? You're building that emotional vocabulary, and that's really the skill that you're building here by playing this game. If you are going to learn to understand other people's feelings, to be empathetic, well, you have to be able to understand your own feelings. And how do you develop that ability to understand and regulate emotions? Well, first, you have to be able to express those feelings without worrying that there's going to be consequences for it. And if you're playing a game, there are no consequences to that emotional expression. Next is you have to have the language. So kids need to learn the language to describe their emotions, especially the primary emotions like frustration or alarm. You might talk about alarm rather than anxiety. And then eventually they can sort of experience that feeling. Maybe they can develop the ability to have more than one feeling at a time. I mean, having mixed feelings is really how we learn to regulate our reactions when we're feeling emotional. If you're really frustrated about something that you're working on, but you care about finishing it, those two feelings together can balance one another out so that you can actually overcome whatever the frustration is that's causing you a problem. Now, if a hero lands on one of those power-up squares, they get the power-up card, which names an emotion and names a situation where you might feel that emotion, gives you a chance to talk about it. But if the villain lands on a power-up square, that sends him back into the center. And so now he's back in his lair and he's not in the road where people are going to run into him. But at some point, it is quite likely that a hero and a villain are going to, maybe not on a power-up square, but at some point the hero and villain are going to wind up on the same space. And there is another interesting thing that happens when you do that. When the hero and villain are on the same space, you have kind of a face-off. And what winds up happening is that the player who did the role that caused that hero to move onto the same space with Gooby is going to randomly choose one of these feelings, but the player doesn't get to look at which feeling they're holding up. So I don't know what this emotion is, but everyone else around the table will be able to see it. They have to act out the feeling and I have to guess what it is. And if I guess what it is, Gooby goes back to the center. If I mess up though, and I don't guess the feeling correctly, the city block turns red, even though there's a hero on top who's trying to protect it. Eventually, all of the heroes are going to have made their way around back past that start space where you began the game, and then you count up how many of those power-up cards you have all together. You use those. Each one can flip one of these city tiles from red back to gray, and if all of them are gray, once you've traded in all of your power-up cards, then the heroes win the game. Otherwise, Gooby wins the game, and who wants that? But honestly, that does happen sometimes, even in these cooperative games. Even if the heroes lose those games, though, you've had an opportunity to talk with your kids and help them develop their emotional vocabulary, and that is a good skill to have. And that, in a nutshell, is Empower Empathy. This is a quick game that's really about helping younger kids learn to name and recognize their feelings and the feelings of others as well. This is a game that I'll be bringing back with me to my office so that I can use it when kids need to talk about those feelings or emotions or to learn about their own feelings and reflect on them down the road. And it's a game that I could see, homeschooling parents using or teachers in the classroom using if they're doing a unit on emotional recognition, social emotional learning, or empathy. It's a game that's coming up on Kickstarter very soon. I'll put a link to the campaign in the show notes. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this box, in this rule book that I didn't even touch on because Brains on Games is about games, but this manual also includes information for parents and teachers to help to practice these skills or develop these abilities in real life. So there's all kinds of information in that book that parents or teachers may find helpful in between those lessons when they're talking about those feelings. If you have any questions or comments for me, you can leave them in the comment section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.